Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the invite tonight. There are 139 local governments in Western Australia, and some of them, most of them, ask the Electoral Commission to run the election on their behalf. If we don't run it, then the CEO is typically the returning officer. So all of the 30 local governments in the Perth metropolitan area and another 60 throughout the state, we're running their election. And the council here has voted by absolute majority to ask the Electoral Commission to run the election for them. They've also voted by absolute majority for it to be run as a postal ballot. So that's the context in which I'm going to talk to you this evening. All right. Okay. To be eligible to run as a candidate, you must be on an electoral roll. You must be 18. You cannot be the nominee of a body corporate. You can nominate as a part of a body corporate on the owners and occupiers roll managed by the council to vote, but you can't run as a candidate. Now, Luke just mentioned the mandatory online training course that every candidate, doesn't matter whether you've been a councillor for 20 years or this is your first time, you need to have done that, because when you do your nomination form, you will tick the box and sign a legal declaration to say that you have done it. And my understanding is that the department will be maintaining a list of people who have completed it. So that's the biggest change that has happened at these elections. I've got quite a few slides, so I'm going to race through them fairly quickly. There are some disqualifications. You can't be a member of another council and then run, I might have a go at Canning. I'm on Gosnells, and if I get Canning, I'll resign from there. No, you can't do that. You can only run in one election, but within this council, you can run in the mayoral election and as a councillor. So you can nominate to be a mayoral candidate and you can nominate to be a councillor candidate, but you can't run in any other elections at the same time. I won't run through all of those, but the Act prescribes them, and I've got some candidates packs that if you wish to get one from me after this session, these are contained on these USBs, and all of the details about the eligibility and disqualifications are contained therein. As just said, including guides for candidates, formality guides on ballot papers and things like that. And all of the forms that you may need are all contained on these USBs. To be an effective nomination, you have to have completed and signed your nomination form, provided a candidate profile, and I'll come back to that in a moment. You make the deposit of $80 cash with the returning officer, and that needs to be made with the returning officer before the close of nominations. Now, if you are running in an election run by the Commission, we have a product we call Nomination Builder. You can go onto our website, register, and go through the form electronically. You could fill it all in. You can come back to it whenever you like and think about your profile. You might do a bit of a draft, show it to a few people, get some feedback, go back to it and so on. The important thing is you can't actually nominate online. Once you've filled in your nomination form, you make an appointment with the returning officer at a mutually convenient time and hand it over. It's signed and witnessed and so on. When you do go on to the system, it'll give you a number. Make sure you write that number down, because if you don't and you forget it, you'll have to start again, the whole process. So it's important that you take that registration number, because that'll enable you to log in at other times, and the returning officer will also be able to log in once you nominate. That's what it looks like. You go onto our website. There's a link on the home page of the Electoral Commission website, nominate as a candidate. It'll take you here and then you'll go through the process. There's also a little video there which you can watch, and that helps you, gives some guidelines as to how you do that process. The profile is a really important part of nominating, because it's what the punters out there will look at in determining who they're going to vote for. They may not know you from a bar of soap, but they'll be voting, and the candidate photograph and the profile is a really critical document. Don't do what some people do and invent hyphenated words because it ends up with 168 words or whatever. Because if there's no time for the returning officer, he'll or she'll just drop off the last 18 words to get into the 150. So if you can't say why people should vote for you within 150 words, you probably shouldn't be running. All right, so think about what are the punters out there interested in looking at what a councillor for their ward or their mayoral may be. So think about that pretty carefully. You can get a photo, you can crop it and so on. It's a really easy to use system. If you nominate, you'll be given a roll, which has two formats. One is an alpha list of all electors in the district or ward for which you are contesting, and the other is a manipulative file of habitations in that district or ward. So if you're going to be doing a bit of door knocking and you want to work out your routes and how you're going to do it, you can play with that particular file. So that's the habitation list, and then there's the alpha elector list. It's a postal election. It means that every elector on the roll will be posted ballot papers containing the ballot paper plus your profile and some other information they have to fill in, and then an envelope for them to return it. So it comes back to our central processing centre. We start lodging with Australia Post on the Friday before that. We start with Halls Creek and Esperance and places in far-flung parts of Western Australia. So we do all our country lodgements first. Metropolitan councils will start being lodged from Wednesday the 25th. Your council decided to go with priority mail, so which means that if we lodge it on the Wednesday, it should be delivered the next business day because it's priority mail. If it gets lodged on Friday, then it won't get delivered till Monday. Okay? Your returning officer will be advised what day the City of Canning ballot papers will be lodged with Australia Post. Once we've lodged them with Australia Post, we've lost control. Right? It'll be delivered in accordance with Australia Post, but your council has opted to go for priority mail. When people receive their mail, those who are going to vote tend to vote quite quickly after receiving it. Most people who are going to vote within 5 business days of receiving their package. So the active campaigning period in a postal election, there's no point in campaigning too much in a few days before election day. Yes, you might get a few people, you can remind them, but a lot of people who are going to vote will have already voted. Now, one of the true things in local government elections, it's voluntary, unlike state and federal elections where people have to vote. So it's voluntary. Statewide average at the last local government elections was 35.5%. In some, Mount Marshall had 85.5%, and Joondalup, I think, had 25%. I can't tell you offhand what the Canning turnout was, but you can see why the Minister and the Department are very keen to look at ways to improve participation in local government elections. But from your perspective, as a prospective candidate, it's important that you realise the mechanics of a postal election. So once it's delivered, the people who are going to vote tend to vote quite early. They can also drop their package here. So advice to people, if you're saying, have you voted? And they say, oh no, I didn't. Oh, it's too late now. If it's Thursday before, it's not going to get there. They can drop it in at the council in a ballot box that'll be on the reception here or in reception here. But you, as a councillor, as a candidate, cannot handle a postal package for any other candidate. Don't say, oh, look, I'll collect all your packages and put them in for you. You've broken the law, $5,000 penalty or a year in prison. So it's a serious penalty. So you can't interfere with the process. Penalties apply. It's a postal election, so everyone's going to get sent a ballot paper, and it will have their name, it'll have a barcode, and when that comes back to us, we'll scan the barcode to mark them off the roll. If they say, oh, the dog's eaten my package, or I've lost it, I'm not sure where it is, they can come here to the council office and seek a replacement. It takes a little while because we have to cancel the other package to make sure they can't vote twice. So it does take a little while, but people can seek a replacement if they don't believe they've received it. What sometimes happens, it comes in the mail and someone in the family chucks it out with the catalogues and the other mail, and then they say, I never received it. But they can come and seek a replacement. On election day, voting closes at 6 o'clock. People can come in here a replacement. They can come in here and drop it in the ballot box if they haven't mailed it. After 6 o'clock, the returning officer will count all of the ballot papers on that night, and they'll declare the result on that night. It's not like in a state and federal election where postal votes can be accepted till the Thursday after election day, and the real count happens about a week after election night, and on election night it's all indicative counts. In a local government election, it's the real deal. Soon as 6 o'clock on Saturday the 19th, there'll be a count, and there'll be a determination, and there'll be a declaration of the outcome. The results for all local governments that we're running, all 90 of them, will be posted on our website on that night. I said before, there's an $80 deposit. If you're elected, you get your $80 back, or if you get 5% of the total number of votes, you get your $80 back. Really important, if you're printing something, a flyer, and you're going to stick it in letterboxes, whether you're doing it personally or using a mailing house to do it, it must be properly authorised. So the purpose of that in the Act is so that people who are interested in voting can contact you, and they know that it's been authorised by, it could be the candidate, you might have a campaign manager, you might have your wife or your husband to authorise it. As long as it's authorised by someone, and that someone has a physical address. Can't be a PO box number, it's got to be a physical address. So if I'm producing a flyer, why people should vote for me, it's got to say authorised by Chris Avent, 16 Wombat Crescent, printed by Acme Printers, Fitzroy Street. So in other words, if it's a bit of a quirk in the Act, it is an old Act, as Arthur said, or Luke said it, 1995. If it's been printed commercially, you've got to have the name and address of the authoriser and the name and address of the printer. If you're putting an ad in the newspaper, you don't need the printers because that's obvious, it's the newspaper, all right? But you still need to have it authorised. I won't go through the various offences, bribery, undue influence and so on. Canvassing in or near a polling place, you are allowed to solicit and canvass for votes, but you're not allowed to do that in a polling place or within 6 metres of the entrance. But you can, encourage people to vote for you. That's what it's all about. On the night, you as a candidate can't be on the count floor, but you can appoint a scrutineer to observe the count on your behalf. If you receive gifts, again, I'm not going to go into lots of detail on this, it's on the USB, but Arthur, as the CEO, maintains the gift register, and if you receive any gift to the value of $200 or more, then both you as the recipient and the donor need to register. And that might be a single item, or if the same person is giving you multiple things and the total value of those multiple things exceeds 200, then it's got to go onto the gift register. And that doesn't have to be just cash. It might be you're having a big fundraiser and a promotional thing, so the local baker is donating all the buns to you. Or you might have a friend who's a printer and says, I'll print it for you for nix. That's still a gift. And the value of that, if it exceeds 200, needs to be registered. Now, sitting over here, if I could ask you to stand, please, Ian, is the most important person that you're going to be dealing with. Ian Stringle is the returning officer for the City of Canning election. Thanks, Ian. Ian's a long-standing electoral official at various levels of government. He now spends most of his time troopsing around the world on cruises and so on. As a retired from full-time employment, his last gig in local government was as the returning officer for the City of Perth. So he's a very experienced officer, and if you've got any questions about the process and so on, Ian will be your first port of call. That phone number and so on, don't ring it tonight and so on. He won't get his phone until the weekend. So from next week onwards, he's your contact. Any questions? Yes?
There used to be an exception if it was family members giving you money. There wasn't a disclosure, has it been changed?
No, that's okay. And if it's a birthday present or something like that.
If someone wants to give me $300 for the campaign, I'm not obligated to.
Yeah. I might even ask the gentleman at the back there who's more expert in that area than myself.
What I would suggest is, if you give me 2 seconds, I'll check my phone, but I'm fairly sure that friend, relative, like family relative type arrangement.
Yeah.
It is regulation 35, I think.
Yeah. My understanding is that it's not a gift if it's from a family member, from your spouse or your son or your mother or whatever. Any other questions? Yes? Yeah, what you do, if you're printing it yourself, all you need to do is authorised and printed by, okay? It's a good question. So you don't need a separate line of authorisation. Yes?
URL, basically, is that one word? You wanted to put multiple URLs in your 150 words? Is that an issue?
In the 150 words, you have to provide at least one point of contact. And that's not included in the 150 words. So you have your 150 words, and then you might have a mobile phone number, your email account, and your address or whatever. But so that's not included in the 150 words.
If you wanted to put a URL in the 150 words?
You can do that, yeah, not a problem. But it'll be interesting to see whether that counts as one word or multiple words. So there is a word counter built into the system, and it'll tell you that. It doesn't count things like full stops and commas. They're not counted. Normal grammatical things are not counted as part of that. Any other questions? Yes?
How clear should be the authorization, the wording, and the address of that person?
It's simple.
I noticed some people are just so small you can't even use a
Yeah.
What is the use then?
Yeah, look, you're quite right. There is nothing in the regulations or in the statutes to specify the point size, as long as it is included. And you've probably seen at state and federal elections where you've got big posters and tiny little print and so on. I think my personal view is if you're authorising something, you want people to be able to see who it is and how to contact them. It's part of the election process, but there is nothing specifying the size that it must be. It needs to be at the base normally.
Just one more question. When can people start sending out flyers and things like that?
You can send out flyers and things like that anytime you like. Yeah.
They have to be authorised.
Yeah. Look, again, the Act is a bit grey in this area. I would say if you're having stuff printed, best practice is always authorise it correctly, and that way once the election period commences with the advertisement next Wednesday calling for nominations and so on, you're okay anyway. You don't suddenly get a message saying, look, stop distributing those, they're not properly authorised. Question?
Yes, just from the point of view of the dog ate my ballot papers.
Yes.
Now, if a person comes down before and or on the day, does the barcode identify the person, and are you then able to, or the returning officer, able to look at that barcode and then look at it in the results or the
No.
envelope?
No, I'll very quickly describe the way it's processed. When you vote, you put your ballot papers in a ballot paper envelope with an elector certificate, a perforated elector certificate attached to it. You have to sign it. If it's not signed, it will be rejected under the Act. When we process it, they come in. The first thing we do is scan it. We take the ballot paper envelope out of the reply paid envelope. We scan it to mark the person off the roll. Then that slip is torn off that, and the ballot paper envelopes and the elector certificate are separated, and that will maintain the anonymity of the vote. Those ballot paper envelopes are then opened, the ballot papers are removed face down and put into bundles of 50 and put in a sealed ballot box, and then that ballot box is delivered to Ian, the returning officer, on Saturday afternoon on the 19th.
Basically, if you haven't received it, it'll be taken as granted that person hasn't voted, and then they can come down and vote.
Yes, yeah. And if someone, let's say someone did vote and send it in, and then came into Ian on the Saturday and said, look, I don't think I voted. Can I have a replacement? He will be able to straight away say, oh, well, no, you have voted. You've been marked off as having voted. I can't issue you with a replacement. But if he's not marked off, then he can issue them with a replacement.
One other question. From candidates' profiles, if somebody says something which possibly is misleading to one person and not to the other, who interprets that? Is it the returning officer or the CEO?
It's neither. At the end of the day, the High Court has made rulings on these on several occasions, and the ruling is, in a political contest, what a person says is only misleading if it, at the point of marking the ballot paper, the elector is misled. So if you put out a thing saying you are only allowed, if there is a vacancy for two, let's say in a ward where there are two vacancies, and you said you're only allowed to put one tick on your ballot paper, that's misleading, because it would mislead the elector at the point at which they mark their ballot paper. But if Mary Smith says Joe is a thief and a liar and should not be trusted, it's not the returning officer's role to deal with that. It's up to them to use civil court action and defamation laws to deal with that. It is not something that the returning officer has power under the Local Government Act to deal with. Okay? But you need to be careful. I mean, the reason for the candidate induction training being introduced is partly because of some very poor behaviour by some candidates at the last elections in social media. And if you are establishing a website or you are establishing a Facebook site to do your campaign, that too has to be authorised, not just printed material. I think I'm taking more than my fair share of time. Any other questions?
On that Facebook thing, where would the authorisation be on Facebook?
If you're establishing a Facebook page, right, then it's authorised on that landing page. All right. It's not, you can't authorise a Twitter comment or something like that. You'd use your 140 characters with authorisations. But if you're establishing a website or a Facebook site, then it does need to be authorised. People need to know who has established that site.
So it can be anywhere on that Facebook page. It can be just a photo on the Facebook page.
Yeah.